Hey everyone, David T.S. Wood here, and welcome to my Extra Mile Conversations with David T.S. Wood. As this week we talk about all things fighting with relationship expert Beth Hanishewski. How to fight well, what to say in a fight, how to bounce back from a fight, how to create the optimal fight plan. So, enjoy the show, and don't forget to subscribe, click the notification button, get involved with the conversation, make your comments, and I will be featuring comments on the show. So enjoy it. See you on the other side. Being Beth, welcome back to show number 2.
Hi.
How are you?
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to get into it? Listen, the one thing that we talk about a lot, I love fighting. Not fighting, I like conflict. I like conflict. And the reason I like conflict, I think, is because I really, I teach on conflict, but I navigate conflict well. I mean, and what I've discovered about conflict is on the other side of conflict, when it's done well, is something magical. You know, you and I have had maybe 1 or 2 big fights in those 30 years, right? One in particular that comes up for me. But again, we sit and we laugh about it. You've told stories about that fight in company around other people. So it's a great storyboard because, you know, obviously we're in love with each other. Obviously we're great friends. But you know, fighting in relationships, I know that to you particularly, you know, you're saying it's not about, people have to learn how to fight well. And I remember at Beyond Courage, you were one of my teachers at Beyond Courage. And when we were doing the men's day, I remember sitting around, and it was actually a guy, he was a friend of mine at the time. We don't see each other much anymore, but if I saw him, he's a beautiful man. But he's a gay guy who gave some advice to all these other guys sitting around about how to fight. And the advice he gave, which it just resonates with me, is to actually sit down and have a fighting plan. So he said, when I was closest to my boyfriend at the time, we sat down and we made a plan for when things do go awry and we fight, that we actually have this plan. So I'd love to get into it with you. And I know that conflict isn't your favorite thing, but over the years, right? Over the years, you've realized the importance of conflict, right?
Yes. Well, and you know, I do. And so many people believe that a relationship that's absent of conflict is the best. And I kind of disagree, you know, because most of the time, if someone says to me, we never fight, you know, I've been married for 25 years and we never fight. I think to myself, well, one of you is suppressing how they really feel. That's what I think. One of you is lying, because people, when you can't be in relationship with other humans without disagreeing with them. We're not robots, right? We will have disagreements. We will see the world differently. We will have different expectations. It's inevitable that conflict should arise. So I don't think the measure should ever be whether or not you fight with your person. But
sorry, you gave me a thought, and I don't want to miss it. I want to come back to what you're saying, but you said something that was so good that about suppressing. And as you were saying, I thought, oh my gosh, you know, and what I often see is that person who you say you never fight with, when you see them alone somewhere, that they're different.
Yes.
And I didn't want to miss that. It's like they're like living like with a mask on, because I see those guys. Those guys who, I love relationships where the person is in front of their spouse and they say exactly the same thing as they'd say to me if I'm out with the guys. You know, maybe not true sometimes, but you know, that there's no kind of mask. That's what I see. But anyway, I just didn't want to miss that person who's, oh, we never fight. Quite often, that person, when they're alone with someone else, they behave completely differently than they do with their wife.
Yeah, or they would share the truth, which was like, oh, I get so upset when this happens, or I'm so hurt by this, or but I don't say anything, you know. And again, we could probably do a whole show on finding your voice in your relationship, because so often we don't.
Writing it down.
Okay, you write that down, right? Because we don't tell the truth. you know, in our relationships. And there's lots of different reasons why we don't. It's not because we are pathological liars often. It's more because we don't know how, or we've been conditioned not to. And, you know, that's not, you know, conflict is bad, or that, you know, that's not being
afraid if someone sees the real truth, they won't want to be with you. Right?
Yes.
I mean, like, right. So, yeah.
There's so many reasons. So anyways, you know, I love that we want to talk about conflict, because I think conflict is healthy. But it's how do you fight? So you're right. Your friend from Beyond Courage, and oh my gosh, you know, it's how do you fight is way more important than whether or not you do or not. Right. How do you fight? Right. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is what I call the real measure of a quality relationship is not whether or not you fight, but how good is your turnaround? To me, that says, oh my God, you have an extraordinary relationship. Because if you can have a fight with your loved one, your friend, your spouse, whatever, and turn that around, you know, in minutes, that's a high quality, you know, that's a very, very extraordinary relationship. If you take hours.
Yeah, right? Makeup sex is a term for a reason.
Right, exactly. Right? You know,
I interrupted you. You said instead of taking hours or days. Finish that.
Yeah, right. So, you know, I certainly, like, you know, in my own relationship, and certainly in relationships of people I've coached, the turnaround is so important, and it really makes or break relationships in many ways, because the longer the turnaround takes, the more collateral damage is done.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because when you were talking there, what comes up in my mind is people who do have fight. I mean, let's call it healthy fighting, you know,
yeah.
You're not seeing it, but there's passion in that. There is passion in you know, because like you say, it's like two people living in the same house all this time. And
yes.
often with families and all these different things, right? And frustrations. But I love passion, and passion, you know, if you're going to be vocal sometimes, you know, just you feel like having a
yeah.
Right? Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about healthy fighting. And from your experience, and again, you've worked with a lot of couples that you know, they go through these different stages. And maybe in the last show we did, we talked a little bit about rating a relationship from numbers. Yeah. Let's talk about the stages of a relationship as you see them, you know, from when someone first meets all the way through to apathy, you know. So can you sort of, and again, we may be making this up, but you know, that sort of euphoric kind of beginning, right? And then it goes through these different stages. How do you see those stages, and then fighting along the way? Because typically in that early stage, there's not a lot of fighting going on, is there?
No. And you know, I like to use sort of the analogy of like a child in many ways. I think it applies, and you can apply this to really in business as well. But, you know, in that early sort of infancy, toddler phase of a relationship, right? Everything's great and it's exciting. And, you know, like a child sees it, the whole world is like, oh, you're amazing. And everything, you know, everything's incredible. And you're very childlike.
I love your morning breath.
Right? It's like, oh, that doesn't bother me. I'm just happy you're with me, right? We're like a golden retriever, you know. It's like, yay, we love it all. But then as a relationship, you know, matures, gets a little older, right? So now, you know, now you're into more, you know, that school age years, right? Where now you're not as, you know, everything's not as glowy, you know. Then you're, you know, when you see more cracks, you know, you're more willing to share, hopefully, your truth about how you really feel about the morning breath, or how you really feel. And now not everything is roses all the time. But then, you know, and then you move into the sort of the teenage years of your relationship, and you think, well, then this is where there's actually a lot of fighting for independence in this relationship, just like your teens, where you love being a couple, but you're like, oh, I need to do some stuff on my own. There's this real pull to also be a person outside of that relationship. And lots of relationships get threatened by that phase, where they're like, oh my God, they don't want to be with me 24/7. But it's like super, super healthy. But in those early days, we don't. We tend to just cocoon, you know, we lose all our friends, disappear, because we're like, I just want to be with my love, you know. And then you kind of move into that adult phase. And that's really where you have the opportunity, if you make it all that way, to bring some wisdom right? And that's really where all those, hopefully you've cultivated some really good relationship habits. And I think that's what makes a relationship extraordinary or not is sort of the sum of your rituals and habits. And if you make it to your adulthood in your relationship where you can bring the wisdom, where you're willing to take responsibility for how you show up, you're willing to apologize when you screw up, you're willing to really fight fair versus fight, dirty. And you know the power of that turnaround, right? Where you really are always, and coming back to what we talked about in that first show, about that you spend more energy doing things that pull your partner closer than you do pushing them away.
Yeah. Again, if you haven't listened to that first show, that one piece of wisdom, I'm not going to repeat it because I want you to go back and listen to it, but that is just such gold. And it's something that I'm certainly going to embrace more myself because it's just I love simple things that I can utilize. And so, Ben, let's go back to the root of fighting. And, when you talk about those different stages, especially when you get to that independent stage, obviously that's where that teenage stage, where a lot more fighting can occur, because, you're really discovering that. But can we talk a little bit about the history, like how people learn to fight and where the root is? So some people are really notoriously bad fighters for two reasons. One is they won't fight, they won't express, they just clam up and go quiet and don't speak about anything. And the other is it's like such rage and such toxicity. So if you look at extremes, but talk about the origin of where we learn and how we sort of pick our modality of fighting typically. Where does that come from?
Yeah. Well, obviously, our childhood, our family of origin plays a huge role in how we witnessed, fighting, and even how conflict in general was handled in your family. And I remember like years ago when I was in social work, I went to a conference and they asked us, they said, how would you name your family when it came to conflict resolution? And I named my family the rug sweepers. Because if there was a problem.
It's so funny. I didn't know you were going to say that. And I was thinking, I wonder if it's sweeping stuff under the... That's what I was going through.
Yes.
I know your family.
Total rug sweepers, right? So it was like, woo, there's no problem. Yeah. No problem here. Let's just... I think I house clean the same way. Let's just sweep it right under there. The rug sweepers. So I really was taught that, not to really talk about stuff. It's better to just sweep it under the rug, let it go, whatever. But I also saw, particularly my mother, not ever really expressing her own needs, not really saying things and really tolerating a lot, and so I kind of, we learn kind of patterns, and either we emulate our parents or we go to the opposite of our parents, or, we make decisions along the way. And that's one way that we influence our fight. Obviously, I think our own life experiences make a big difference, right? Of how, when conflict arose, how it was handled. Did people freak out at you? Did you get beat up? Did you lose a friend? So there's our own personal life.
That's an interesting point. How, if you go back in your history, and let's say, for example, when we had our big fight, and if we've never spoken to each other,
right?
If imagine that the wound that now I would maybe, or you would associate to fighting in such an explosive way, and so that happens as a young person. So, if we've had a really negative result because of fighting, that we may be afraid to express now, right? We sort of, we take that wound with us, right? A little bit. So.
Totally. Well, I feel like I should talk about our fight then. Can I talk about our fight?
Yeah.
Our big fight, which again, we laugh at. So it's so funny, really, the fight. And the irony is I hardly remember what you did in that fight at all, but I remember, of course, I remember you did something really bad prior to the fight. Obviously, that is clear. I don't know what that was, but I remember feeling so mad at you. I came to stay for the weekend. We're having this great visit, and then something happened where I was so mad I thought I should leave your home. So, but I don't remember what that was, but nevertheless,
it was something quite small. I know it's something quite small.
Yeah, or it could have been big, just saying. Anyways, nevertheless, I decided, consciously or unconsciously, but I thought, well, I'm going to leave in a very dramatic way because I'm going to, illustrate that I'm very upset and I'm leaving. So I packed up my little...
It's about tears, vocal, slamming, marching,
stomped out,
car,
slammed the door. Yeah, I'm leaving.
Car,
and I had
slamming doors.
Yeah, I had full plans to put my suitcase in the car and squeal out of there.
Yeah, and I at the time had this long driveway, like a...
Yeah, and I was going to give her gravel. Oh, I got so excited. Gravel spitting. Yeah. So anyways, I did that. I, slammed the door, my dramatic exit. It was all in place. I put my suitcase in the car. I go to get in my car and I realize my dog is nowhere to be found. And I'm like, oh, so I'm calling my dog, which is, impacting the dramatic, squeal down the driveway now. And my dog was over at your neighbor's, which, as you remember, was a bit crazy and a bit not great. Anyway, so my dog had gone over to your neighbor's house where they had all these chickens and cows, or it's some sort of mini farm. Horses, yeah. So anyways, I'm hunting around trying to call my dog quietly. Dad, guess that, come. And my dog won't come. And just as I'm trying to call her, as I'm tiptoeing around the neighbor's property, she opens the window from the top of the house and goes, "If I see your dog, I'm going to shoot it. Right? Get off my property." So I'm like, oh my God. Now my dog's going to die. So what do? I run. I'm not even thinking. I literally just told you off about a minute ago. But now I'm running as fast as I can back to your house. I knock on the door. You open your door. I think you're in those clogs. You used to wear those big yellow clogs. I remember the clogs anyways. And I am bawling my eyes out. Your neighbor's going to kill my dog. Your neighbor's going to kill my dog. Oh my God. And you're like, okay. And so you spring into action. We save the dog. We find her. We bring her back. And by this time now, I seems kind of dumb to leave.
Yeah, that was our big fight. Anyway,
we stayed the rest of the weekend. And now, but here's the great thing about that story, is that, like I said, I don't remember what we fought about, but I remember that turnaround. I remember that you helped me a minute after I basically told you off to help my dog. And then we could laugh about it. And then we didn't, there wasn't any big heavy discussion when I came back in the house. We're like,
there's a thing called residual energy. And I think a lot of people, when they fight, they want to carry the residual energy. And then, when something else comes up in the future, so one of the things for me about being an elegant fighter, and I can't say I've always done this with every single situation. Sometimes it's harder with kids because you kind of remember so much over the years. But I think that the idea of letting something go immediately and stepping out of the fighting into the, because even that night we drank a glass of wine and you must have retold the story if you don't get your shoot it. And by the way, I lived on a very large property, so it may sound like we had neighbors she was just a little different, and so we had acres apart. So it wasn't like we were living on top of each other. So, but Beth, let's go into them fighting. What are some of the strategies if we're going to have and become elegant fighters? What are some of the strategies that we can start to practice to become somebody who can fight and, because the fighting's there, and turn it around quickly? So fight and turn around, because that's really what we want to have is those two. And then I love the third element, which is let go completely. The residual effect is I'm not going to hold on to this, right? No. Residual, and that's kind of my DNA. I can just let go without...
You're probably the best at that I of anyone I know, for sure. Okay, so the first thing about fighting fair. So you'll love this because you and I talk about this all the time, in that, I love to use sailboats in analogies as metaphors for relationships. And so this is probably the very first kind of concept. When you think about fighting fair, if you think of your relationship like a sailboat, the most important thing when fighting is not to damage the hull. And so many people damage the hull in their relationship, meaning they attack, the person, or they bring up these terrible things, or they say these things you can't take back, right? And they don't. And when you're fighting fair, you just have to talk about yourself. I think that's the most important thing, so if there's one sort of tip to take away, is if you're fighting, no matter how mad you are, is to use I versus you, because it'll make it a lot easier for you not to damage the hull. Because when you say, I am so upset, I feel so hurt, I cannot stand this, I'm feeling, and you just keep talking about yourself and how you're feeling and how upset you are, it'll allow your person to just hear the impact that something you've done, whether you meant to or not. It is not about whether it was an accident or you didn't mean to, because lots of people get hurt by accident, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't create an impact, whether it was planned, it was an intentional thing, or an accidental thing. So if you just say, I am feeling, it'll allow you to just fight on deck, so to speak, without damaging the hull. But it's the minute you start saying you're a piece of shit, you're such an, you always do this, you're the worst this, you're blah, blah, all of that stuff, it becomes so wounding
I just want to give, if someone's listening, which, you've already potentially damaged the hull through the way you've been fighting, don't worry about it. It's never too late. I don't have many of these signs up in my house, but I have a couple. One says it's never too late to start the day over. In other words, you can start a new fighting, and just the philosophy of you wanting to become an elegant fighter or fighting fair, and that from this moment forward, hulls can be repaired. It's not like, when I own a couple of boats. When I bring my boats out of the water, we clean the hull and we repair the hull and we patch the hull, and there's a lot of things we can do. So I just don't want us to feel that, it's too late. Because I've done a lot of you fighting instead of I fighting, and my hull has got a few holes in it. Well, guess what? Starting today, that can come out of the water, and if you love that person and you're using the strategy from last week or last call. So anyway, just to I didn't want people to think, oh my God, it's too late.
No, that's so important, and you're right. And one of the ways that you can start repairing the hull is to acknowledge to the person that you have damaged it, right? And you just say, listen, I was thinking about this, or I was listening to this podcast.
Goosebumps. Just got goosebumps. That is like, even if you borrowed my boat and you hit a rock, to come and tell me. Just come and tell me. Because then if I find it after you've used my boat, it's a whole different energy. But if you just come and say, God, I can't believe I just hit a rock with your boat. I know that I'm using the boat metaphor a little bit too much, but No,
but I think people can relate to it because they understand that, you're right. I think, anyways, acknowledge it. Just say, listen, I was, however you want to say it, but here's some words you could say. You could say, listen, I was listening to this podcast and they talked about relationship and damaging the hull when you fight by being really mean. And I think I may have damaged our hull, and I'm sorry. Yeah. But I'm really committed to repairing it. Because really the whole point of having a 10 out of 10 relationship is the kind of relationship where not just the hull, the deck, the sails, everything, the engine, everything is cared for. And that way you can sail, if we want to really go down all the metaphor here now, but then you can sail into any waters, right? Any seas, any storm, because it's strong.
Well, and again, because I'm a sailor, and you and I have talked about writing about this, and I really, as we're talking about it now, I really feel that pull. But, when I first sailed across the Atlantic, we were in a force 10, which is a near hurricane, and the boat is burst. The waves are crashing over the top, and the hull was sound, right? and we were able to navigate all of these different types of oceans and from being becalmed to the horrendous storms. And again, so I think the analogy is a beautiful one that, you go to your partner and it's like, hey, I realize that I may have damaged the hull, but I really want to repair it. I really want to make that hull sound again, right? I love it.
Yeah. So let's talk about so let's say you're in the conflict, and how do you turn it around quick, right? So I love the idea of actually having a fight plan, Ben and I have talked about this many times, because we used to, again, we came from two completely different families and ways that we fought. And one of the things that, because I grew up with the rug sweepers, as an adult, I decided to be the opposite. So I was like the rug shaker. So I always want to talk about stuff. I always want to like shake out and like, let's dissect, and, too muchy. I'm the other way, where, my husband, especially if there's conflict, he will shut down. He doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, he doesn't want to. If we gave that, and because I was thinking about him as you started talking about this, of what I defined his family as, because I know his family too. It'd be like, if you're the rug sweeper, then I would imagine his family didn't use the broom at all. They just pretended there was nothing to sweep up. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Then they're the broom. What do you call it? The broom non-owners or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
There is no dirt to sweep up. They just, you just ignore it. They ignore it. Maybe they ignore it.
Like the pretenders, right?
Pretenders. Like it.
So we had to find our own way, because Ben's way, my way would be to over talk about things, and certainly in the past over talk about them, and not necessarily in kind or in all the you and damaging whole language and all the things, right? And so which would make my husband just shut down. And so we made a little thing that if we ever got where the fight was getting too escalated, if it was getting too intense, too something where we probably would damage our hull, that we made a pact that we would break, meaning we would take a time out, but we would come back in a short time, like 30 minutes or less. And because we really wanted to work on the turnaround. And that's really what I would, is so key. And when, let's say you're coming and again, it takes time to be someone who can turn it around and calm yourself down. And here's the thing, if you can't, you are so mad, you're so in it, you're just like, this is where it's going to take some practice on your part, not that, to be the kind of where you can come back in that turnaround. And even if you're not ready to really strategize about the problem, which I actually don't recommend. I don't recommend you come back and talk about the issue, because you're just going to escalate it back up again, because you're probably not at a place where you can. But just come back.
And to be quite honest, I mean, some of the fights are, it's that old stuff, residual old stuff that just keeps resurfacing. It's not necessarily anything specific. It's the combination of things. But because the turnaround, if we're both committed to it, and again, we haven't talked about the apology yet, but and the letting go. But because the turnaround is there, why not focus on that? Because the practice, at some point, if you practice this a lot, you could be in the middle of the fight and you can actually start laughing at each other, because you realize that you're going to turn it around anyway, because you've done the work, you've got the practice, and it's almost like in the middle of the fight, there's here we go. Have you ever had that?
5 more minutes.
Come on.
Just so you know, that's all you got.
Yeah,
right? Get it out. Yes, you could. And, so many people are afraid to bring humor into fighting, which is such a great technique, right? And all it takes is one person. So, people always say to me, oh, well, who should go first in the fight or in the turnaround? And I'm like, the most conscious person goes first. It does not matter. Whoever has it, if it pops into your head, we should turn this around, it's you, right? You're the one. But there's so many ways. And again, I get, every couple, human relationship has to find their own way to turn it around. But, for me, I think that saying sorry is a really good start. And here's the thing, you don't even have to be the one be the one that's to blame, because so many couples get in this, oh, I always apologize, it's always my fault, I always have to say I'm sorry. And so when I say you could even just say sorry, you don't even have to say sorry necessarily for your role in the fight. You could just say, I'm sorry that we're fighting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you're so upset. I'm sorry we're disconnected right now. I don't want that.
Right.
Right. And you just begin there where, again, you want to think of it's so easy. And if you really want to do another great exercise, and we're at the exercise challenge here.
In case we forget.
But in case we forget, but one of the things that you could do was, is to sort of think about all the way, maybe 3 ways that you can make a fight worse. Which I think is a really fun thing to do because it allows you to go, well, if I really want to make it worse, I'm going to name call. That's a good one. I'm going to raise my voice. I'm going to bring in your mother. I'm going to bring every other fight that we've ever had into it. And I'm going to,
slam the door and yell from the bedroom.
And I'm going to slam the door and yell and squeal out of your driveway. That would make it worse, right? So, and I really, again, it's such a great exercise because we don't give ourselves permission to think about really even all the crazy things we do. We always want to be all enlightened, but it's like, no, okay, if I really wanted to make it worse, what would I do? I would do, and it becomes so clear. Then you go, oh, okay, so what if I wanted to make it better? And then those things that you do to make it worse become your answer to the turnaround. So if you know all the things you do to make it worse, and we all do them or have done them, then your clarity becomes, okay, if I do the opposite. So if I scream and yell and name call, then, okay, well, what would it make it better? I don't, disparage. I don't use, language. I don't attack. I only talk about my feelings, right? I drop the you and add the I, things like that. There's, again, you can kind of go down the list from there.
But I think even setting up a fight plan, because it's going back to Beyond Courage days, but the very nature that you have a plan means that fighting doesn't have the same energy, because you're acknowledging that fighting is a very normal part of a relationship, and we're going to be great fighters. And even when you hear a couple say, oh, we fight so well. I mean, that sounds sexy. It sounds sexy, doesn't it?
Right?
It's like, right.
We brag about that. They all brag about, oh, we never fight. I think couples should say, we're the greatest fighters.
Oh my God, we have the best fights, right? Because again, energetically, when we think about fighting, and everyone needs a different strategy. I like the 30-minute gap. What I would say is, so for some, I know for myself, if I was in it, the best way, I don't want to talk about it necessarily, but a good stopper for me is that my partner was to come over and just kiss me. And I made a promise or a pledge that if you kiss me, I'm going to let it all go. I know that, that I can, because the practice is, my pledge is, if you kiss me, I'll let it go. Right? Yeah. And come back into the moment. Right? Now, obviously.
And physically touching someone is really powerful, because usually when we're all up in our heads, if we're all mad about things, and physically touching it's very difficult not to soften because of that. So, again, you have to come up with your own fight plan. But I really, I would do a short timeline though. I mean, that's really the key, the goal would be, less than a minute kind of arguments, but even a half an hour where you have a fight, you come back and it's over. And not to say that you might need a little bit more, where you have to come back and really talk about the issues, especially if you keep fighting about those issues over and over. And that's where, that's often
fighting about money or fighting about things.
Yeah, and maybe you do need but you have to do that from a conscious place. And I often use the, someone who's under the influence of alcohol or drugs or something, because if someone, let's say you're out with friends and your buddy is totally, intoxicated, and you're like, okay, it's time to go to bed. You're not going to get into with your buddy while he's drunk, that he needs to, drink less, and you go into a big lecture and a big intervention when they're drunk, right? You put them to bed. And in the morning when they're sober, you drive over with the coffee and you go, hey, let's talk about last night, when they're sober. And that's kind of the same approach you should take for fighting. The turnaround is not about negotiating. It's about just reconnecting, like I said, going to bed, calming down, reconnecting, and then, the next day or 12 hours later or whatever, a week later, make an appointment with your coach and you go, we got to talk about this thing that happened last week. Right. And that's often what I do with my clients. They'll email me and they'll go, oh my God, we had this big fight. I'm like, bring it to the call. Let's set up a call, right? Because then things are way calmer and then you can be creative about how to.
Well, you know, what happens when you're fighting, right? The emotion goes up and intelligence goes down. And you've got two people who are, you know, this far apart. They're intelligent. Keep my hands here. Like, it's just this stretch, right? I want to talk about style, though. I want to talk about interpretation. Because look, if I'm a chest-beating yeller, and if I lose my temper, which again, I mean, I don't lose my temper very often. I mean, you've known me 30 years. You know, I'm just normally quite a consistent human being. But I've lost my temper with my kids. I rarely lose my temper with people. I just rarely do because I always feel like I've already lost. With my partner, I've had fights with Asta, and you know, we do fight. And again, we live long distance right now, and so it's, you know, it's sometimes harder because there isn't that physical touch that you can, like I say, for me, a great kiss is a great way to end a fight for me, right? It's like, boom, right? But let's talk about interpretation. So if someone yells and screams, but let's say on my neighbors growing up, Salvatore Mariali, it's Italian, they always were yelling so loud at each other, right? Because they were yellers. Yeah. Maybe that's another distinction. Pretenders, the rug sweepers, the yellers. Yeah. Right? But if you're someone who, you know, has never really been yelled at and someone's yelling at you, it's easy to interpret that in a way. But what if it's an expression? It's like, you know, how Ben goes to the pretender because, you know, he would rather not talk about it. But if the person's a yeller or comes from a yeller heritage and this expression is what they need to express, I think it's important that we sort of don't give meaning to the style of fighting, that if it's dead quiet or if it's a yell. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's important, right? To have those distinctions.
Yeah, no, I you know, and again, this is where you have to be, you know, sensitive. And, you know, so many people are there's a couple things I want to say about this. So one is that you might say, well, I'm a yeller. So, you know, kind of deal with it. And I don't think it's as simple as saying I'm a yeller, because yelling might really trigger your partner.
Right.
And it's important to think about that. So as your volume goes up, recognize that your partner is probably shutting down. And so you might say, well, I would love to be just a big yeller. But you might have to temper that. If you're married to a partner who, I don't know, was abused, or their father yelled and they just can't take it. Like they might have made a promise to themselves, I will never live with a yeller. And then they married you, this very passionate yeller, right? And so I think you have to kind of be sensitive to if what you do really triggers your partner.
Sure.
And at the same,
go ahead, Karen.
And at the same time, your partner's job is to not see you as different. And so understand that, like, you know, again, like I can use myself as an example, right? Because I know I can be very expressive and, you know, passionate in my fighting, as you know.
Emotional.
I can be emotional. But I'm also extremely passionate when I'm joy, right? Like that is part of my palette, right? And so I've often said to my husband, I'm like, well, part of what you love about me is how enthusiastic and passionate and fun I am. Well, which also makes me a pretty passionate, not, you know, pretty loud fighter. And so he sees that that's part of who I am. And if, at least if my yelling doesn't include the, you know, damaging the hull, it's just me expressing in my way. And so there's a both. I'm sensitive that if I do yell, I'm more likely to trigger my husband. At the same time, he understands I'm not his father, and that is part of my passionate wife that I love, who happens to be really mad right now. So it's both. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. That was my point, was that if you have a fight plan, you can discuss that. What I like to do when I'm in that space is beat my chest and rah! It doesn't mean anything. It's just me. So again, it's just that understanding of each other's, when you make the fight plan, style, and then interpretation, and then tempering it. If you know that, because if you're making a plan that says, well, when people yell, I just close all the way down, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why we're talking about having a fight plan. Let's talk about when to make the plan. Because what I, again, learned that particular day many years ago, this is a decade ago, was he said that when he sat down to make his fight plan, it was when they were just after, a beautiful intimacy, or, when they're really connected to sit down and make a fight plan, not when you're fighting, or not when you're upset with each other. Right, we're going to sit down and make a fight plan. It's not that. Yeah. It's sitting down and saying, hey, listen, man, let's just sit down, and because these are going to come up. It's when you're kind of more euphoric is a good time, because there is no heated emotion in the planning. It's just, and you can also laugh at it. So tell me again, what is it you love to do when you're fighting? Oh, I tell you, I love to do it. I like to name call. That's what so talk about that. When's a good time for you to sit down and do a fight plan?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you never want to make a fight plan in the middle of a fight. Although, let's say you did, but it's way better to do it when things are great, when you're in love, when you're feeling connected, when you're having fun, and go, hey, can we talk about, and that, and that's really what you should talk about after. Maybe you had a big fight, and now it's dissipated. You've made it through the storm. You didn't damage the hull, or maybe it's a little bit leaking. And you go, hey, can we talk about our fight? I really want to fight better. I want to be great fighters. And to acknowledge that all the things you are great at, like we're great friends, or we're great parents, or we're great lovers, or we're great, we have all these beautiful things, but I also want to be great fighters, because that feels like it damages the hull for us, right? And that's when you make the plan, and you come up with all those parameters of what you're going to stick to and especially having something, which would be the equivalent of kind of that white flag, something that if either one of you does this thing, it might be a word, it might be a kiss, it might be something funny, it might be.
That's a strategy. The word thing's a strategy as well, is if you realize that if you have an agreed upon word, if you say fizzle or lollipop, right, whatever it is,
right, that it should be something like that.
It's supposed to be funny. That's what I've used in the past. It's just like that you're sending an agreed upon. You say, well, if I say fizzle, like let's just let's know
it has to stop.
Yeah, we're going to put the timeout in there. And but again, with practice, what I found is this is the very nature of a fight plan. And the kind of cheekiness with it is that when fights happen, they have less energy, because, you're kind of like, there's these things in play that are invisible, and sometimes you can actually enjoy it. That was a good one. Wasn't that a good one? Wasn't that a great one?
Maybe I don't know if I ever would enjoy it, but me, I'm much more sensitive to conflict.
So you always say, what did you call me all these years? You said I was, I have no empathy. Was that no?
Yeah, it was. Well, it's like like a muscle, right? That it was like finding Nemo. It was like this tiny little fat, fin. But you're right. Adding humor is so great. Like this one time, I'll tell you that really funny way to end a fight one time, which wasn't intentional, but I was reading all this new agey energy, feng shui stuff. And I'd heard that if you have a fight in a room, I read somewhere, that the energy is in your house. And if you want to get rid of the fight, you have to fill up a bowl of water.
Carry on.
What? So you have to fill up a bowl of water, and then the fight will go in the water. And then you have to throw out the water, and that the fight will leave your home. So I'd read this on something. So I'm having this big fight. So I think, oh my gosh, I gotta put the fight in the water. This is bad. So I got a big bowl of water. I put it right in the kitchen where the fight would happen. And then, as luck would have it, my husband came back in to, stomp back in there to say, and another thing, and spilt the water. He dumped the fight all over the kitchen, which I just feng shuied into the bowl. And I said, oh my God, you just spilled the fight. He's like, what are you talking? Like, what is all the water doing right here? I'm like, I just put the fight in the bowl. And it became so hilarious that, of course, the fight was over. By the time I explained that he's just spilled the fight I put in the bowl, it was done. So those are the kind of things, and I just would encourage everybody who's listening to think of creative ways fizzle, lollipop, how you end it. And then when you end it, if you make a plate pan, you have a fight and you follow it, I would say wildly celebrate that. It's like, look at us, right? Because that change is hard, and we can get into really bad habits. I think we're the sum of our habits, good or bad. And if you really want to change your fighting relationship habit, and you have a little breakthrough, you turn your fight around, even a little bit shorter than the last time you had a fight, I would wildly celebrate that, because then you'll get better and better and better.
And think about the idea about, maintaining the whole. This, I love that concept. Again, simple concepts. There will be some show notes so you can sort of go back over some of the things that you mentioned, Beth. I love the 3 ways I could make the fight worse, and what are the 3 ways to make the fight better, just to have a fight plan. Again, this show is all about, the extra mile. What's those little tiny incremental things we can do, that little 1% additions we can add. If we add 1% more each day, even, how extraordinary our lives can become through that little tiny sort of extra mile concept. So Beth, it looks like, we spent the whole show talking about fighting, which is amazing. And I think what we'll do is we'll pick up some subjects. I'd love to actually, for you to send me a list of what some of the most common questions are you get. We also we want to do a show, which will probably be an extended show, on the relationship formula, which again, we want to get to. Love languages. There's just so many areas. So I think what we'll have to do, if you're open to it, is maybe once a month, or maybe 2 shows a month we'll do for ongoing, and just sort of really keep the relationship conversation, and maybe bring on some guests with us, so it's not just you and I. Maybe we'll add a couple of people, or in another perspective. I think it'll be fun. What I want this show to be about is to be, I'm not always going to be in my office. I may be out on the boat one day using my phone. I want it to be raw and real, but I want it to be a real conversation. So I appreciate you. Just any last thoughts, any last words before we let this one go?
No, I just think you're right. I think if there was anything I would say, it was just to have a new goal, to be a great fighter.
Be a great fighter. Love you, Beth.
Great fighter. Love you.